What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 2 of the Gen B podcast. I'm Evan, and this is my good friend David. So I guess just to get started today, we're going to be talking about what exactly Bitcoin is, and we'll get a little bit into how it's different than other cryptocurrencies. But before we get started, let's just start by seeing what Bitcoin is at. So as we're recording this podcast, it looks like Bitcoin is at $105,039. Maybe that's something we do at the start of every episode now. Just timestamp every episode where it's at.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
current Bitcoin price. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, 105 is a lot, man. Like 10, I think we clipped 109 last week, so we're pushing all-time high territory, and I think we touched on it in the first episode that don't let that be a reason that you don't learn more about this and consider buying some. Again, not financial advice, but I think both of us think, and we'll probably do episodes on this, that this has a long way to go in terms of price increasing. There's other reasons you want to invest in this outside of just like US dollar price going up, but like definitely keep learning, even though it seems like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money.
Yeah. And it could be very volatile. So, if you're sitting there saying, I'm going to wait for it to drop a bit, it very well could, and I'm sure it will, but just do your research. That's all we're saying. But
Yep.
I guess let's get right into it. So David put together what do you want to call it, presentation a while back?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about
Yeah, I
you?
think I
Yeah, you
made
get in here.
this. Yeah, I think I made this in 2022 or 2023, probably 2023. Um, Really the purpose behind it is similar to what we're doing with the podcast now is how do we take Bitcoin and money and all of that, which is like actually a pretty complex topic. I think a lot of people would agree. I feel like every time, or I've heard a lot that people feel that they don't know how money works. And that's what we're trying to do is we're not experts, but we've spent time learning about this, and we're trying to see how can we distill some of the information we've learned that can be pretty complex and present it simply. So yeah, put this literally a PowerPoint together. This will be on YouTube. So for those of you listening, you can visit our YouTube channel, and the screen will be sharing like the presentation we're looking at. But it's called Bitcoin Basics. I have a little blurb called an introductory course on the best money in human history. So just a little teaser of how we feel about this. So yeah, just put simply, just wanted to simplify like the education around this. And when we were talking about how do we present Bitcoin on the podcast and do it in a way that's easy to understand, this felt like a good resource to use.
Yeah, and I guess before you get into it, I think I've been learning about this only a little over a year at this point, so I'm still relatively new at. There's still a ton to learn about Bitcoin, but I guess the reason I say that is I know a lot of the questions and thoughts that people that don't know much about it have, which is, okay, I've heard about it. Is it a currency? Can I spend it? What can I do with it? Why is it valuable? Those are all questions that I had when I started, because I was sitting there saying, if I can't spend it at a store, or, how do I attribute value to this thing? So hopefully this is just a good introductory um, to learning about that. So without
Cool.
further,
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into it. If I can skip screens here. All right. So yeah, this is dumb. It's just a disclaimer. Again, nothing is financial advice. We want to help you, but we're not liable when Bitcoin corrects 50%, which it very well could. But we're also not liable if it goes up 100% and you make a ton of money. So it's on you either way. Cool. So like throughout this episode, kind of what I want to get into is what is Bitcoin? Part of this presentation gets into how it works. I think we're going to save that for a different episode just because it's like a computer science invention / discovery. neither of us is computer science majors or like working in computer science. So one, we need to refine our own understanding of the ins and outs of that, and it can just get kind of technical. So we're just going to save everybody in this episode and just focus on the what rather than the how. When it comes to Bitcoin, we will talk about the history of money and like the history of Bitcoin within that history of money. So super interesting to me. I hope we can simplify that for people again. And money is just like an interesting topic. Like I think you'll see that there's been a lot of changes throughout history, and we're excited to get into that. Why we think Bitcoin is the best version of money that we've seen throughout human history and what that means for us. And again, won't get into this, but eventually want to get into how you can purchase Bitcoin and store it, but that'll be a different episode as well. Any thoughts before we get into what is Bitcoin?
No, I think no, I think we get into it.
Okay, I have a little bit of a cough today, so bear with me. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin's the world's first decentralized digital currency. So the two big words there are decentralized and digital. I think I'm going to let the presentation flow rather than getting into that. But again, those are the two keywords I want us to focus on in what really is driving value for this. It allows peer-to-peer financial exchange without a financial intermediary. So this is I don't know the first time, like I guess cash allows for that as well, but going back to the digital piece, it's the first time that digitally you're able to exchange value without a bank or some sort of central entity having a say in whether that transaction can go through, or even helping like facilitate it. And then ultimately it provides complete control over your money and your wealth, unlike traditional assets, which again are regulated by banks and governments.
Just to talk about the second bullet point here, peer-to-peer financial exchange without a financial intermediary. It's like, if you tried sending money via Zelle, like sometimes you'll see that it says pending, like someone will send you money, but it'll say pending. And that's because the banks need to make sure that, the person sending you has the money and that you're able to accept it. And, there's a lot of behind the scenes that truthfully, I don't know what goes into it, but with something like Bitcoin, there's no intermediary. It's just, I send X amount to person, and then I guess it depends on how much the network's being used, but it's pretty quick.
Well, think about something like Venmo, right? Where if you're using Venmo, yeah, you can operate on their platform, but anytime you want to move it from your Venmo account to your bank, there's the option that it can take 1 to 3 business days, or you can, I think, pay a small fee in order to make it move quicker. So that's the perfect example, and similar to what you're saying, where banks have a say, or like Venmo as the intermediary in this case, which I think is controlled by PayPal. I'm not totally sure. Basically have a say in your money and like how you can spend it, when you can spend it, how quickly you can spend it. And that's similar to the last point as well of Bitcoin providing you with control over your money without these groups, whether it's a government or corporation being involved, is like we saw it last year. And this is like a political topic, but the Canadian truckers, they were like protesting. I don't even remember the specifics of the protest, but the Canadian government was shutting down access to their bank accounts. And like, it's kind of crazy that a government can do that. In my opinion, like we talked about in the last episode, like money and wealth is the time and energy that you're putting out into the world in exchange for money, obviously, so you can buy goods and services. So in that case, basically your time and energy is being stolen from you. And I don't know, again, that gets very political. Like I'm sure there's valid reasons why it could make sense for a government to have control over the monetary system. But I think ultimately there's too many instances where they could take advantage of that it doesn't warrant them. It's better for them to have no control over it versus like potentially control over all of it, which I think is a lot of people's concerns. And I don't know if we'll get into it today, but things like central bank digital currencies, which, yeah, I probably won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But again, I think there's just a lot of concern of like government and corporations like overstepping when it comes to your money.
Well said. Next slide.
Okay, so like broadening it out a little bit, what is money? So money generally is a medium of exchange, a measure of value, or a means of payment. And this is what we just touched on. It's a quote that one of the most profound things I've come to understand about money is that it is effectively stored energy. Money we earn represents our life and labor energy. Should have attributed that quote. I don't know who it belongs to. Maybe we can add it in the show notes.
Michael Scott, David.
Yeah, right. So cool. Like just along the lines of what we're saying, like money is super important. We all know it, but like this is why. Like it's your life. It's the value that your life is creating in economic value.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where learning about Bitcoin, you get a total different mindset in terms of money, because I think for a lot of people, we're so used to being like, it's just part of life in the US, which is just like you go to school, go to college, earn your degree, get a job, get paid, buy a house, start a family, blah, 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 blah. You don't even think about like, um, you don't really think about how like you're just kind of pre-programmed. And you don't realize that like the money that you earn, like is exactly what this quote is. And when you realize like your time and energy on this earth are finite, that so the money that you earn from it, you want doing the most for you. You know, you don't want to be working for it for your entire life, which is why people dream of retirement and living a very relaxed life. But um, it's important to learn about those things now, because in an ideal world, you know, and hopefully with a better money, we can retire a little earlier in life, so we don't have to put as much of our energy into jobs or things that we don't want to do, and rather spend that time and energy working on projects or things that we're passionate about, because our money's better. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense for you, but we'll continue to talk about that as we continue here.
Dude, fire me up. Couldn't have said that better. And I mean, that ties into inflation, right? Like when prices, I think I'm going to explain it in like the way it legitimately works. It's not that prices are going up necessarily, even though like they obviously are. It's that the value of your dollar is going down because there are more of them in circulation. So anything you've earned, let's say you have $1,000 in a savings account, if the value of that money goes down and you're able to purchase less goods and services with it, it takes more of those dollars to buy the same amount of good that you would have bought a year ago. Your life is effectively being stolen from you. It's basically you wasted however much of that, like this extra time you need to put in to make the same amount or like to purchase the same amount of good or service is life that you lost. And that's like the true shame of it. It's like, yeah, it sucks that things are expensive. And I don't know. I think that's just the connection we want to make. It's like, obviously people are upset. And I think at the root of it, it's their life is being stolen from them. And even though they might not be able to articulate it, that's what's happening.
It's a very slow process that you don't even realize is happening, or you do, and you just don't really know what you can do to reverse it, or
I think that's the biggest thing is people don't know what to do. Like they know they're able to buy less and less or have to work longer, harder hours to get the same amount of things. That's literally why we're doing this podcast, is to say there is an escape hatch for you in Bitcoin. There's other opportunities as well, like assets in general, whether it's like real estate, stocks, like basically you need to invest your money in order to beat inflation. If you're not able to invest, you're screwed. Like, put plain and simple. And I know not everybody's lucky enough to do that. And I'm definitely like feeling bad for people who aren't. Like, I think that sucks. And I hope everybody has the opportunity to do that. And hopefully there are like little ways that you can chip at it. But again, I know not everybody has the same opportunity. But if you're able to, you need to be investing your money, or else like you're just going to fall further and further behind and stuck on this wheel that doesn't stop, because money's going to keep being printed. It's a tax on the working class at the end of the day. And we're the ones that will continue to be taken advantage of unless we really opt out of the system, which is, I think, to both of us, what Bitcoin represents.
Right. And I've touched on this quite a bit, but we talk about how in growing up, a lot of us are taught a couple things. We're taught once you start making money, you should save that money, put it in your piggy bank, right? That's what they would say growing up, put your money in your piggy bank. And then the next thing is that, all right, once you get a job, you're going to want to go ahead and start investing, or you're going to want to start contributing to your company's 401k. And then the next thing they say is, and by they, I mean really just financial experts, and this is truthfully like the things they say are the safest. The next thing they say to do is put it in a high yield savings account, because that's going to earn you more money or more interest than if you're just having it sit in a regular bank account, savings account with a Chase or a Bank of America. Then after that, if you have money left over after doing those things, as well as paying your rent and your other bills, that you should put your money in the stock market, because we're young and we can handle the volatility. But I think I speak for a lot of us where I was never taught that, how the stock market works, how to open a brokerage account or anything of that nature. So you go online and they say, well, if you don't know much about the stock market, you should go ahead and just put it into an index fund like SPY, which SPY is, an index fund that tracks the top 500 companies in America. And it's had pretty good returns historically, but I kind of realize that's like, one, they don't teach you this, but two, that last thing I said, which is invest in SPY, which is deemed kind of like the safest investment route that there is, that's still like, you're doing decent, but like that's not gonna, in the long run, that's
Like,
the
keeps
money.
your head above water.
Right. Right. And the truth is, it just, money's going to continue to get printed. The value of the dollar, we've seen it, the purchasing power that we have is what I think it's gone down. I don't know the exact percentage, but all you have to do is remember that if you went into a grocery store in the year 2000 and I gave you $100 and I gave you $100 now to go into a grocery store, you're probably coming out with a lot more groceries in the year 2000 than you are today. And so that in and of itself, you're realizing and that's just one area of life. And that just goes to show that kind of goes into this, money's broken and Bitcoin is a different, let's just call it money. But
Yeah. Yeah. Sweet. I think that's a good jumping off point into the next slide too, which I don't even know what it is because I don't have it on my screen. Okay, so still getting into like money specifically. So getting into that store of value concept, medium of exchange, and unit of account. So money can be a store of value, which is any item. So like when we say money, this can be anything, right? Like we think dollars, but we'll see it on a different slide. Historically, it's been rocks, it's been glass beads, it's been seashells. So when we say any item, it truly can be any item. But there's properties that it has to have that make it a valuable money. So again, store of value, any item that is able to maintain its value over a long period of time. Medium of exchange, meaning that it's any item that's widely accepted in exchange for goods and services. And then lastly, a unit of account, meaning that it's a measurement that can be used to value the goods and services in an economy. Cool. So yeah, here's that slide. For those listening, it's just, I'm sure I found this on Google, just like a picture of a timeline and showing some of the things that have been used as money. So we have 9,000 BCE, there's a camel. So I think that's referencing to like barter, how people historically would trade, trade goods and services, since there wasn't like a central money. The reason we transitioned away from that is, I think it's called the coincidences of wants or something like that, where because Evan has a camel and I have coffee, if he wants to buy my coffee, that doesn't necessarily mean I want his camel. So in order to facilitate trade better and more efficiently, we need a agreed upon medium of exchange in this case, so that, okay, like as we see the next picture is seashells. Okay, cool. I don't want the camel, but Evan wants my coffee. I'll take his seashells because I know I can go take those seashells and go buy apples with them, even though the person who's selling apples doesn't want my coffee. So that's really the value of a medium of exchange, is it's agreed upon item that you can trade freely to facilitate trade. And so as time went on, like we see 600 BCE, you're starting to see some like metal coins. Looks like 7th century paper currency starts to show up for the first time. It's showing gold bars for the 17th century. I don't know why, but then we get into like digital money via like credit cards, and then we have a picture of Bitcoin at the end. So I guess the summary of this slide here is like, money has evolved over time. There are reasons why each of these things have represented and acted as money. There are pros and cons of each of them. And this has been an evolution, right? And I think both of us would agree we're reaching a point in this money evolution with Bitcoin where we have a better version of money than we've ever had throughout history. And that's been a process. It's taken thousands of years to get to this point. Bitcoin wouldn't have been possible without the internet revolution. So it's just all of these things had to happen one after another to get to the point we are at today, where we have a savings and spending technology that is better than anything that's come before it. I truly view this as like a revolution, in the sense that you had like the agricultural revolution, you had like the printing press, like they're just major moments in history that change the future and how it operates. The internet being one of them. And now you're coming into like this digital revolution. One, I guess you could call it the Bitcoin revolution. I know AI is a huge thing right now. Like I view all of those in the same vein as like being societal shifting.
For sure. And I think just to add some context here, when I first started learning about Bitcoin, the first rabbit hole I went down was the history of money. And it's funny, I think as time goes on, well, first let me say, when you're young, I didn't give a shit about history growing up. Like, it was so boring. I didn't care about it in high school. I didn't really care about it in college too much. I think it's safe to say that the majority of people don't care about history when they're in, like, you know what I mean? When they're in school, most people are cared about more social, like, I want to be cool. I want to be, sports, whatever it is. History is not one of those. So you kind of forget, like, like before the 21st century, like what took place. We're like, if you're born in the 90s, it's hard to wrap your head around how life was in the early 1900s. It's like, especially with, I just think it gets tougher and tougher as time goes on and that's why I think it's important to, that's why people pass down stories and these things are taught, because, history tends to repeat itself. And when it comes to money right now, we're seeing history repeat itself, which is when there's a money that's printed, it doesn't end well. And that's every time in history that's happened. And
Literally
so,
100% of the time. Like anytime they call it fiat currency, where it's just like backed by a government, and not like gold or something tangible, that money fails because there's incentive to print more and more of it to finance the government's operations. But there's massive consequences, like we were saying, where inflation occurs. Basically, the money just spirals out of control to the point that it becomes worthless. And to Evan's point, throughout history, that has always happened with these types of money.
yeah, for one where, and I'm sure we'll dive deeper into this in a future episode because the history of money is fascinating. Um, but yeah, a funny exercise that I feel like when I started learning about this was I was just trying to envision even just living in America, like what life would be like if just all of a sudden like the US dollar wasn't a medium of exchange. It's like, you know, you you sell someone something and they try giving you like one of their like a keychain. You're like, no, I don't want a keychain. And they're like, all right, well, I have like this like slice of bread. Like it's just crazy that, in order for a large number of people to agree on a single medium of exchange, just to try to think about how that even started back in the day is kind of wild. Um,
Yeah,
even
I think, go ahead.
no. Continue.
Well, I want to see what the next slide is. Um, so yeah, now we're getting into sound money, and like where I want like to transition from what you're saying is you're like asking how did we go from barter to like, oh, seashells or what we're agreeing on. And I think there was like an inherent understanding of money in the sense that, and I want to find the slide that gets into like what the properties of sound money are. I guess that is maybe the next one. Um, but there's reasons why a money is sound. And when we say sound, it means that it performs all those functions that we talked about, that it can be a store of value, a medium of exchange, and whatever the last one is that I'm forgetting off the top. But there's properties of money that make it a good money. Seashells, for whatever reason, like filled some of those. And then they're like, okay, well, actually, metal and coins do a better job for XYZ reason. So maybe we can get into it on that slide when it comes up of like, here are the properties. And like, we can talk a little bit like, this is why a cow wouldn't be a good one or a piece of fruit wouldn't, but like metal would be. So here, just to read on the screen, talking about sound money. Money is sound when its value is stable and is able to perform its functions as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. So getting ahead of myself a little bit. Here we go. So this is what I was just talking about. Characteristics of a sound money. So the best forms of money are scarce, meaning that they're not easy to obtain or produce. They're divisible, meaning they can be broken down into smaller units. They're durable, so they're not perishable or easily destroyed. Portable, they can be easy to transport and store. Verifiable, they're easy to identify and verify as authentic. And fungible, meaning that basically one unit is equal to another, that you like a dime is the same as another dime, for instance. And a dime is not a penny, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on this. Like, I think it would be cool to talk about like, why is a banana not a good money, but a coin is?
Yeah, let's have it. You want to answer that?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, let's use bananas. Are they scarce? I don't think so. Like, there are a ton of bananas in the world. I'm pretty sure they're like one of the cheapest fruits you can buy. So that in itself tells me that they're not scarce. In the event that they were scarce, somebody could just go out and produce more of them. There would be an incentive to go out and start a banana farm because they can make a ton of money until like an equilibrium occurred and that price came down again. So yeah, bananas aren't scarce. They're, I guess they could be divisible. You could like cut banana slices and be like, how many slices of banana for your apple?
All right.
So it loosely would fill that. Durable? No. Like, what, how are you gonna save bananas for even a week, let alone years to retirement?
Dude, I have to pick. I'm spending 5 minutes at least at Trader Joe's trying to pick the greenest bananas I could find, so that way they don't go bad by the time I need to eat them. So
Well, that's what would happen, right? Green bananas would become more
yeah,
valuable
I would,
than dark yellow.
dude, I would throw if someone tried to cut, like if we were living in a world where bananas were a medium of exchange and someone tried giving me some ripe ass banana, I guess unless I was starving, I would be happy about it. But otherwise, I'd be like, get this shit out of my
Yeah,
face.
it'd be a riot. It'd be like the least valuable thing, some like crusty banana. Portable. So I guess it's easy to transport if you have one banana, but if something costs 20,000 bananas, you're not going to be able to do that. You can't send 20,000 bananas to your friend in Florida to buy podcast equipment, for instance.
Right. Or if you're say you're going on a vacation with friends and family, and you got to pack like 3 bags worth of bananas because things are expensive in whatever state you're going to. That's just not very yeah, not
Good luck
easy.
with that. So, I mean, I think our point's clear. Like, we don't necessarily have to get into these last two. Bananas aren't a good money. And like, I think that's people knew that. Like, these, even though like this wasn't clearly defined, it just made sense as people were like trading with each other. Like, I think this naturally occurs. Like, what we're talking about is these characteristics. They're things that like naturally make sense for trade. And so like seashells was an early one where, um, depending, I think there was a place in Africa, glass beads maybe is the example there, where the glass beads were really rare. And so they filled the scarcity principle. I guess they were divisible in the sense you could combine multiple, like you could pay for 5 glass beads for something or add them together. They were durable. They wouldn't break down in a week like a banana would. Easy to transport. Where it became an issue was when we get into this verifiable point where colonizers came in. They realized these folks were using glass beads and they were from Europe. And so they started manufacturing glass beads, bringing them into this economy. And it ultimately blew the economy up, caused inflation. It completely skewed. Like, you can view money as, I've heard this, a measuring stick for an economy or a ruler for an economy. And when your money is not sound, that measuring stick ebbs and flows over time. So you basically lose touch with reality on like the value of things in that measurement, if it makes sense. So, um, any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would add is just, it goes into saying if there's ever something valuable, there's always going to be people trying to, do some funny business to get around that, you said it with
Yeah.
beads, but we see it. I mean, money and really everything. Money, there's people that make counterfeit dollars, and, you know, that's not super common, but, the additional thing to that is you're not just talking counterfeit, but you're talking about the printing of more because, and that's where it gets into scarcity. Scarcity is super important because obviously when you know that people want a lot of something, you're going to do everything you can to get more of it because you know that they're willing to pay and you can make more. It's in the issuer's best interest to want to make more of it because there's that demand, which humans are just greedy naturally, and which is part of why Bitcoin is, you've talked about it, the characteristics of Bitcoin and the properties of Bitcoin, um, which I don't know if we'll wait till later in the slides, but here
Here
we
we
go.
go. Um, so again, for people who are listening, we have just an image that's comparing Bitcoin, gold, and fiat, so that government printed paper money, against these characteristics of money. So I think we should go through each of these, like durability. This is from some other source, so it gave Bitcoin a B. I don't totally know the reasoning behind that. It gave gold an A plus, so I think it's probably that it's like a physical good. It's lasted thousands of years. I think that's maybe, if I remember the article, what it was saying is like gold's been around forever, Bitcoin's still pretty new, so we're gonna like wait and see before we give Bitcoin an A plus. And then fiat, like we're talking paper, right? Like I was in Europe recently and had a euro that had a slight tear in it, and I tried to pay at a convenience store, and they're like, "Oh, we won't take this." I was like, "But it's like a tiny rip," and they're like, "Nope, sorry." So it's just like such a fragile piece of paper. Another funny anecdote: I have a friend who's Canadian, and we went up to Canada, and it's like they have Canadian dollars there, obviously. And he was like, "Yeah, like you can't rip these. Like that's like the thing with them. It's like they're like a little more plasticky or something. Like you just can't rip this." And he's like, "I'll give you the money if you can rip it." And I just like tug on it, and it just like rips it half. And he's like, "I've never seen somebody rip a Canadian dollar." So either
It's
I
that
have super
American
strength.
strength you got,
Yeah, it's the
that
American
pure American
strength.
strength. Yeah.
uh, Point being, obviously, like fiat, when it comes to cash, at least, is not very durable. Um, Portability. This is a really interesting one. It gives Bitcoin an A plus. The reason it's digital, right? It exists in a network in the ether, like to be super technical for you, I guess. Um, so yeah, you can move millions of dollars from Washington to Florida to Europe to Africa easily. And gold, given a D for portability, you can't do that. Like if you're moving gold bars worth billions of dollars, you need ships and trucks and security. And I mean, even if you break it down more simply, if you're an individual in like a war-torn country and you have a bunch of gold, like there's only so much you can carry on your back. And even that, you're at risk of it being confiscated, which that's not an issue with Bitcoin. We'll eventually get into the reasons of why, but
Well, let's talk about real quick in terms of portability, because what I've recently like started thinking about, and a lot of this has to do with kind of what's been going on. One, in California with the wildfires, and living in Florida, there's a ton of hurricanes, and I guess I say that because in terms of Bitcoin, it's it could be valuable to a person in a different country for a different reason than it's valuable to us here, which I think is something that's hard for people to wrap their heads around. Earlier in the podcast, I said a lot of my friends who I tried talking about Bitcoin to early on, the first thing they say is, it's not, what can I do with it? Like, I can't spend it at the coffee shop. I can't buy, I can't put it into like Netflix to pay for my subscription. But, if you're someone in a country that doesn't have banking, or their money's like constantly getting printed, where it's just becoming less and less valuable, not even by the years, but by like the day, where you're like, I literally need to spend this. Or I guess what I'm saying is, someone in a different country has a different use case for Bitcoin. Or maybe you're someone that lives in America who has family elsewhere, and that family member that lives in a different country really needs that money now, but to wire that money to them via, I don't even know what, Wells Fargo, or I don't even know who, I don't
there's
even
like
know what,
Western Union,
Western
which
Union,
takes like huge advantage. Like I think they're like price gouging people on that. So yeah, totally.
right? And so, someone that's in that scenario would say, wow, Bitcoin is, I could see why there's value there, because I can just send this to their wallet as long as they have a phone, essentially. I could send this to them almost immediately, and they could spend it, or they can use it however they want, as long as that country, there's a use case for it, which like we're seeing in countries like El Salvador and that are accepting it, and other countries as well. But I say the wildfires in California and, hurricanes, because I'm thinking about a scenario. If I was in California and, I know that this fire is potentially going to hit my home. If I, over the years, if I had millions of dollars worth of gold, what are you going to do with that? Like, that's heavy as shit, I'm sure. Like, I don't even know what gold looks like if you're purchasing it. I don't know if it's coins or bars or what, but I would imagine that it's incredibly heavy. Um, and probably just a pain in the ass to take with you and to
hmm
protect. Um, so in that sense, yeah, the portability of it is not good for gold. Same thing as if you're someone that decides, all right, I'm gonna get my money, my fiat, and I'm gonna put it under my mattress. Like, you're someone that's just like, I'm gonna take cash and put it under my bed. Well, in the event of a fire or something like that, you're screwed. Like, it just lit into flames and there's nothing you could do about it. Um,
hmm
and that's where having a digital asset, you kind of sit there and you think, well, I'll never be in that scenario or whatever. But in that, for people that have been or are, Bitcoin is a very good solution to that. Um, so
One
anyways,
other thing on the fiat, like I totally agree with all the points you just said. Not even talking about cash. Like if we're talking about like your money in a bank account, if you're trying to transfer a certain amount of money, I'm pretty sure there's limits for all banking institutions on how much you can do that
yep,
for.
they'll
I want to
flag
say
you.
10 grand. Yeah. So it goes back to these central entities having a say in like how you move and handle your money. And it's like who gave them the power to do that, you know? Like at what point did we agree like, oh yeah, this institution should have a say in like when and how I can move the money that I made via the time and energy that I invested?
Yeah. Well, I don't know anyone that's super wealthy by any means, but I've heard stories where just online, of people that try to wire a certain amount of money, and then the banks are asking them, well, like, what are you sending this money for? It's like it kind of goes into what you're saying, where there's times where you feel like there might be overstepping involved when it comes to our money. But in terms of portability, I think that yeah, I think we laid that out. So I guess, did you want to continue with?
Yeah, maybe just so like fungibility, they're all pretty good. I don't even know why some would get Bs. They're so Bitcoin and fiat were given a B and gold an A. To me, they're all fungible. Like one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. The same amount of gold equals the same amount of gold, and same amount of fiat equals the same amount of fiat within like the confines of like USD or pesos or whatever. So don't think we need to get too into that. I think verifiability is interesting in the sense that I think the point of view of looking at this is counterfeitability. Like you can't counterfeit Bitcoin. There's, I don't even know, thousands, millions of like computer nodes on the network that are constantly verifying transactions. And if there's any sort of fraud or counterfeiting that occurs, basically every single computer would have to be tricked into accepting that. And it's just not possible. And like, I definitely want to get into like how all of that works, like the checks and balances of the network in a different episode. But I guess just point simply, like you can't counterfeit or scam or commit fraud on this network because there's just way too many people verifying it at every second of the day. Whereas obviously gold, you could, I don't know if it's tungsten, there's like other metals that like people gold plate because they have the same density, and like you don't know until you like cut open a gold bar that it's a counterfeit. Um, and same thing with fiat, like maybe not the easiest, but there are people out there who do counterfeit. Um, yeah, so I think the biggest one to touch on really is this last one, scarcity.
Mhm.
Scarcity is probably the most important factor in determining whether something has value as a money. like we said, bananas, if I feel like bananas are super valuable, I'm just going to go and print more, or sorry, go and grow more. Basically the same thing. Um, and then when that happens, because there's more bananas, the value goes down because there's just more of them available. They're not as valuable. So Bitcoin, one of the most important properties it has is there is a capped limit of 21 million Bitcoin that can ever exist in the network. That's written in code. For that to change, the entire network of those millions of computers that I was mentioning would have to agree to change that. And because it's such a value proposition for the technology, I mean, never say never, but I don't see how that ever changes because that's like, it's literally a meme. Like there's this idea of like, um, is it infinity divided by 21 million? It's basically like the value of everything in the world. Basically everything else in the world can be like, have more of it produced besides Bitcoin. And so that's what's going to give it value. And I think a big reason we think this is so valuable is it's a good that will always go up in purchasing power because everything else is growing while it's staying the same.
Exactly. And going deeper into that, in terms of scarcity, because, you could find scarce things everywhere, but if you go down this list, you'll realize why they can't be considered money. Like, obviously like valuable art is scarce, but you can't use a tenth of a, I'm trying to think
A
of a famous
Monet.
artist. There's like hundreds of them.
You're gonna do an
All
eye from a Picasso painting.
right. For instance, I work in sports cards, and a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card is, you know, one of, if not the most expensive cards out there. Yeah, it's scarce, but technically you could divide it via um, uh, online, but you can't use it as money. If you went to the grocery store and you tried giving them a Mickey Mantle baseball card, they're not going to let you. Uh, like, they're just that's not going to happen. And obviously, right now in America, you can't go to Publix and or whatever your local grocer is and use Bitcoin, but um, Bitcoin has the properties necessary that you could see in 20, 30 years time that being accepted.
Well, and
Um,
there's already technologies being built on Bitcoin to facilitate medium of exchange. So that's a big debate right now, and we won't get too into it. It's like really right now where Bitcoin's at, it's probably better suited as a store of value, or at least like that's its best, like most common use case I'd say at the moment, where because it has all these values of, or like meets all these properties of money, its value keeps going up. So it's a really good savings vehicle. You could argue the best savings vehicle we've ever had. There's room for improvement in terms of being able to spend it, to Evan's point. I think it will definitely happen over time. And I've even seen conversation that like to get to that point, you have to like go through these phases of like before you can spend it, something has to be widely recognized as a medium of exchange. And we want to do other videos on this. There's like really interesting things happening right now with like banks being able to hold and accept Bitcoin. So we're watching the evolution of this technology unfold right before us.
exactly. It's pretty crazy that we're living through this. And just to talk about, I think like you said, scarcity is the most, like in terms of what's up here, is arguably one of the most important um, properties, because we've seen it with the US dollar. It gets printed. Like, they're always printing more of it. In an ideal world, you know, you ask yourself, we talked about how, we're kind of taught to save our money, putting in a savings account, then, invest in the S&P, invest the money. Like in an ideal world, our money is valuable. What we're using on a day-to-day basis is valuable, but it's not. Because if it was, we wouldn't have to be looking for these other outlets to get better returns on it in order to like stay ahead. And that was something that was a real like aha moment for me learning about Bitcoin, because I was sitting there, I'm like, why do we have to invest? Like what, like has it always been like this, where since the start of time, where they've needed to find, you know, more ways to whatever the money was at that time to make more of it. Um, I don't know. That was like that aha moment where I'm like, this stuff is broken. Like what, like working a job for most people isn't even enough to like stay ahead now. Now you have to, like you said, you have to like you have to invest it. You have to be savvy in that sense. And a lot of people don't have the time to do that. They're working 8 to 12 hour days. And, you know, I've heard like this is talked about on tons of podcasts and whatnot. But, um, you know, at this point, you have to be your own. Not only do you have your job, but you have to be your own, like investment banker. Like you have to be on Robinhood, like while you're at work, to see if you're like, if there's like, it's just at this point, and it seeps into all other things. You know, people are gambling a lot more now because they're, you know, everyone wants to get more money now. Like I want more money now. And um, yeah, it's just, we're in a tough place as a society. And, you know, I think you and I believe, as well as many others that have learned about Bitcoin, that Bitcoin can really be a potential way out for a lot of people.
Well, and just to add to your point, I think the reason we think that is because we think the problem at the root is the money. It is fiat currency. It's USD. It's pesos, again, whatever, euros. Because you can see here, like if you're looking at the screen, if you look at the scores Fiat gets, it's the highest is a B. There's an F for scarcity and a C for durability. Gold has a mixed bag. There are a few A's in there. There's a D for portability, and then Bitcoin is all A pluses and B's. So I guess part of the point too is like fiat is the worst. Like I think we can say that plain and simple. Like fiat currency is garbage. It will always lose its value. Like we said, 100% of fiat currencies throughout history have done that. So you need to have an outlet outside of fiat. If you're more comfortable with gold for whatever reason, that's fine. Like it's better than fiat for sure, but there are reasons that it's not as good as Bitcoin. So it's a spectrum ultimately. As long as you're moving away from fiat as much as you can, you're moving in the right direction. I think like what my journey was is, and we talked about it in the first episode a little bit, is, and Evan did in this episode, like, okay, well, it's a high yield savings account. Okay, now I'm dabbling in stocks and so on and so forth. You go down this path where if you learn enough about it, you're like, why would I invest or save in anything that isn't Bitcoin if Bitcoin has the best savings properties of everything we're talking about? And on top of it, if you're talking about just like a US dollar returns basis, it's performed the best in terms of returns since its inception in 2008 compared to literally everything.
right. And in order to, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would assume that the only way to potentially beat Bitcoin's returns over, I don't know what period of time you'd want to pick, but you'd probably have to pick a specific stock in in a specific time period. But that just goes to show, it's like not everybody has that in. Let's be real, you need insider knowledge in order to pick on a stock that's going to go up 10,000% over a certain period of time. Like for the majority of people, by the time that you know about that stock, you're already uh, late to the game almost, in a sense. And not to say that it can't go up more, but those outsized returns, you just miss out on that because you're not privy to that information. But you're kind of seeing it with Bitcoin. You know, I was sitting there with, you know, in late 2023 thinking, man, I'm late. This thing's been around since 2009 and it's 2023 now. And so many people have probably been buying this when it was $5 a coin and have made so much money. And um, I'm not going to get to one Bitcoin. but you realize like you don't need to get to whole Bitcoin. You can put in little amounts and, um, I saw firsthand that I was in fact not late, um, until this point. I mean, like I said, when I started, it was at 45, I think, and now it's at 105 today. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, it's going to fluctuate, in 2 months, it could be at 80. And then 5 months from now, it could be at 200. But that's what happens when you see adoption. Like there's going to be heavy swings in price because, um, there's many factors that we can get into, but, what you have to remember is that there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. Currently, there's only, I think, about 19 million in circulation. And just so people know, there's more than 21 millionaires in the world. 21 million millionaires in the world. That's what I meant to say. So theoretically, if every millionaire decided, I want to buy one Bitcoin, you can imagine what that would do to a price of a scarce asset. And the theory is that that day is going to come at some point. But as Michael Saylor says, who he's obviously he's like the face of Bitcoin at this point, he says Bitcoin is on a need to know basis. You'll know about Bitcoin when you need to know about it or want to know about it. Someone that's wealthy
Mhm.
right now, for the most part, they don't need to know about it because money's not a problem to them, or that an issue hasn't arose that they need to look for a solution. But for a lot of young people, we do have a problem, and that's, our savings vehicle is, we're kind of screwed in a sense. So, um,
Well, and think about what happens when those currently wealthy people do have a problem and they're willing to throw everything they can to get one Bitcoin. Like, I think it's going to happen. I think there's a tipping point that occurs eventually where there's just like a mass pile on. Like, we're already seeing institutions start to get into this. Like, BlackRock has the most assets under management of any investment company in the world. I want to say it's trillions of dollars. I want to say like 10 trillion. So
yeah,
they own a shit ton of money and like are able to manipulate it and bend it to what they think makes sense. They started a Bitcoin ETF, the first Bitcoin ETF, which is just like a fund where you can basically invest with them and get the returns of Bitcoin, put simply. Um, but yeah, it just goes back to the importance of getting off zero. And I think another important call out is and this is for any investment, don't put money in that you can't afford to lose for sure in the short term. I think that's part of the value of Bitcoin is like, I don't expect that the money that I'm going to put in, even if it loses within the first year or two, is going to continue to lose 4, 5, 10 years from now. I think there was something that, I mean, shoot, if you had bought anything before 100,000, you're up. And again, to Evan's point, that can go down, but over time, anybody who's bought at all-time highs is currently up on their investment. And even if you're not making these like outsized, insane returns, you're not making a 10,000% return. Is there not value to just saying, hey, I know the money that I have today is at least going to be worth the same amount 5 years from now? You can't say that with the US dollar. You can probably say that with stocks and other assets, but to Evan's point, like there's a lot of other factors like who's the CEO, what's the industry, like what's their shareholders like point of view on things. So just like I think Bitcoin represents like the easiest, like the best risk adjusted vehicle to save your money.
yeah, no, that was good, well said. And yeah, at this point, I think I said it on the first episode, but if you're sitting there with US dollars, your options are, like we said, you put it in a savings account and it earns like half a percentage point in terms of interest, or you put in a high yield savings account and it's 5%, or you put it in, SPY, and I think that's growing at like 13%. I think Bitcoin's like 70%. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but in terms of the past 10 years, those are like, it just outperforms everything basically. So if I'm young, at least this is what my thought process was. I'm like, I'm young, I can handle the volatility. How am I not going to put at least a little bit into this? Because I don't want to sit there 10 years from now or let's just say 20 years from now, and I have a kid and they're like, did you invest in Bitcoin like when you were growing up? And I say no, and they go, why not? Like I'd rather sit there and say, yeah, I did, because it went up a lot, rather than sit there and be like, no, I didn't. Like at least for me, I'd rather sit there knowing that I did put in just a little bit. And even, let's just say, in a world where it does go down, which, I think you and I definitely don't think is the case, but let's just say it does. I'd rather at least the data speaks to the fact that really you should be. Like, in terms of its performance the past 15 years, year over year, it's been one of the best performing assets. Like, if you're someone that, like, I think a lot of people that don't know about Bitcoin see this as a gamble because they don't know about it, and they've lumped it into cryptocurrencies in general. But when in fact it's truth, I think I've heard Michael Saylor say this, but it's riskier to not put your money into it right now. Like, because your dollars are literally melting away when they're just sitting there, and you've got something that's growing incredibly fast. And again, like David touched on, this is not financial advice, but for us, we just look at the data, and the data says that this is the scarcest asset. It's the best performing asset over at least a 10-year period. That's enough for me to sit here and say, yeah, maybe I should put in a little bit and let the chips fall where they may. And then as you continue doing research, you can decide on your own if you think it's something worth putting more in, or maybe you're like, you know what, I'm good with just putting this little amount in. But I think our hope with this podcast is that we've done a lot of research on this, and like David said on an earlier episode, was hopefully we can filter some of that out for you and do that research for you, or at least try to do that. But I think we always recommend to do your own research, because it's pretty fascinating to learn about this stuff. I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling here, but it's just so fascinating that we're at a point where, when you think about, we've talked about the history of money, we're living in a point in time where the money we're seeing it starting to change a bit. And when I'm thinking of major financial things such as like the stock market or the creation of the US dollar, it's hard to even wrap your head around the beginning of that. Like, how did that start? What was it like when it started? Like, what bad things happened when it started? How did they fix that? Like, we're at the beginning stages of what we believe is that next, like, what people are going to look at as like that next iteration of that, where this is like, I wasn't there when the stock market started. I was there, I think the stock market started in the early 1900s. I have no idea what happened between now and then, what significant things, but Bitcoin is so young in the grand scheme of things. It's 15, 16 years old, but it's young enough where we can understand its history, and history repeats itself. And so, sorry, I'm going on a tangent
No, you're
here.
good. I think my last point on that would be that we're just at a really unique point, to the point that you're making, where we're able to spend what, again, is shown on the screen here, should be considered kind of worthless. We're basically spending paper and able to buy something that should be considered hugely valuable. There's going to come a point, I think, it may not be in our lifetimes, where government money doesn't exist, because the market has deemed Bitcoin is money. This is what we use. This is how we exchange value. No, I don't want your worthless government paper in exchange for my Bitcoin. Like there will literally come a day where people won't accept fiat currency for Bitcoin, I think. And again, who knows how long that is. This has happened in history. The Weimar Republic in Germany in the 1920s after World War I had massive inflation within a few years, and people couldn't get rid of their paper money quick enough and were burning it in fireplaces to stay warm. So to Evan's point about history repeating itself, like unless you do the research or listen to podcasts where people are doing that research for you, like you might not know what's coming, but I don't know. It's a slippery slope to Bitcoin adoption, I think, that could potentially move quickly. It could take a long time. It's hard to say. And that's why I think it's important. Like we have this opportunity now where we know we can get at least some today. And to Evan's point, I love this stat, and I may not get the numbers right, but there's 8 billion people in the world and everybody wanted some Bitcoin. There's a very small amount of Bitcoin that would put you in the top like 2% of global wealth. It's like you could buy access to be in the top 2% of global wealth today for like a few $100 to $1,000 or something. So I just think there's such an outsized opportunity right now that if you're seeing the value of what we're saying with this ecosystem, now's the time. Because you don't know if you're going to have that opportunity. Like you probably will for a few years, but that can quickly go away. Like 5 years ago, people were able to buy 10 plus Bitcoin for $100,000. Today you can buy one. And that's probably going to keep trending in that direction over time.
Yeah, and very well said. And on top of all that, you might be sitting there saying, okay, all that sounds great, but in the past, all of this is happening with now what looks like a president and a government that's pro-crypto and pro-Bitcoin. I should say pro-Bitcoin.
I mean, they are pro-crypto, which is an issue, but it all, what is it, like the tides raise all ships type of thing?
Right. This is the first time in history where, truthfully, there's been someone in the White House, I shouldn't say someone, the president that has been vocally been for Bitcoin or for crypto, which makes this an even more unique situation, just in the fact that these next 4 years, there can be the next 4 years could shape the next 100 type deal with what they could potentially put in place in terms, it's just, we're living at a very unique time, and it's in your best interest to learn more about Bitcoin, in our opinions, because
Totally.
you only get this time once. So
love it. Well, we're at an hour and 8 minutes. Let me see what the next slide is. Maybe that's a good cutoff point for this episode, and like we can definitely get into the rest of the presentation in a different one. I think that was an awesome conversation. I'm excited to snip that up, put some TikToks out and all that stuff. Just like we're saying, we want to make this digestible, and we're doing the long form via the podcast. So this will be on YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, or Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. And then we're figuring out ways to create shorter content and get that on Instagram and TikTok as well. So yeah, I would love for you guys to follow us. We'll start throwing our handles for social media in like show notes and whatnot. And yeah, hopefully this is providing value. Like we said, we're always open to feedback. Would love to help us share the message. Like, I think one last point I want to make, just to be clear, is like, we're not like, this isn't a Ponzi scheme in the sense that like us promoting this, like, benefits us directly. Like obviously price going up since we own some, like naturally is good for us, but we don't control this network. It's not like we have like an outsized amount. Like I got into this in 2021, Evan in 2023. we're not these people with a ton of Bitcoin from 2008 that are just like rolling in money, you know? Like we both work day jobs. Like this is just a side thing that we're doing that we're really passionate about. And there was even one point just throughout 2024 where I was like, do we even do this podcast or like try to share this message to just like working class folks, because institutions and governments are getting in and price is probably going to run away before people have the chance to really get a significant amount. And I think we both agreed that that's even more of a reason to do this now, because like we just said, this opportunity could like leave a lot of people soon, like where it's out of reach. And um, if we can even help one person improve their financial future, I think we'll feel awesome about that. So
For sure. And just to go off of that too, real quick, we've never seen an asset like Bitcoin before. So, you've said a couple of times like it could get away. And I guess when you say get away, you mean in the sense of getting to one Bitcoin. But no matter what the price is, like you said it, what's infinity divided by 21 million. And the truth
right.
is, in a world where there is a demand by a lot of people in a lot of countries and a lot of entities, like who's to say where price ends up? But I think the point, that you were trying to make was just,
Get as
now is a
much as
better
you
time than
can while
ever.
you can.
Right.
Right.
Like learn this as soon as you can. And, um, yeah, just a really unique time. But yeah, really like the conversation we had. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us via, our Gen B social handles, or even if you have our personal social media accounts, just DM us. Happy to answer any questions and um, just have a conversation truthfully. So, yeah,
Well, all right. Well, yeah, we'll see you guys soon, and look forward to continuing the conversation.